and we've discussed this, Paul, you've done your top fives with this. The top 5 jobs in college football. I don't think you have to take long to probably give us your top 5, but let's do this one more time, and Max is going to discuss it with us as well at 4 o'clock. You give us on the chat room or the text line, 254-339-1122. If you want to call us, we have open lines on the air until around 3:40 or so today, 254-339-1122. You give us your 5, and they don't even have to be in order. You don't have to worry about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just your 5. Their 5 we mentioned yesterday. Alabama is number 1. Number 2, Ohio State. Georgia is number 3. I believe Southern Cal was Texas was number 4, and LSU was number 5. Now, this was not the writers. This was coaches and staffers who said what they thought were the top 5. Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Texas, and LSU. Now, there's a couple right outside that window, including the one that's open right now with Southern Cal. So you give us your 5 without any particular order. And we'll read those on the air, on the chat room, and also the text line today at 254-339-1122.
I would take 4 of those, but I would take out Texas and put in Notre Dame.
Notre Dame?
Yes. I think Notre Dame is even though you have
9th.
Yeah. I would move them up just because you have all this padded extra benefit that no one else has. And then at Texas, there's just right now, I would have agreed with this pre-national championship, pre-2005. I would have said that I don't know how you wouldn't want to be a coach at Texas, given all that they have. But post-2005, when they tasted
how about when Mac started losing traction after the 2019?
So post-Mac Brown, it's just I can't imagine how people deal with it.
Okay, there's 100 coaches and staffers they polled. Listen to this comment in the article. Craig, you tell me about this. Even with all the turmoil, Texas still has da-da-da-da-da. The belief is that the job has few peers of upside, and it still persists. However, Texas was included on less than 1/3 of the 100 ballots from coaches and staffers who work in the Big 12. Is that hate? Is that more a sign, at least within their current conference? There's a belief this job is overhyped.
I don't think it's hate, although I'm sure Texas fans will feel that way. But I think, maybe it's a little bit overhyped. I don't know what's in the minds of these coaches, but, you got the fertile recruiting ground with the state of Texas. You've got the SEC membership now. I do think that takes that job to a different type of a level. And we're talking about a top 5 ranking. So, if somebody wants to cry over that, then by all means. But our artificial top 5 ranking is not like some big slap in the face to begin with. But let's talk about what they always talk about. They got money. We know they've got money. Which to me is like my big turnoff, is that it's just so money all the time.
And yet they have so much they win and got more.
We suck in football, but we got more money than you. And hey, we don't have this, but we got more money. It's always a money thing, which is fine, I guess, for those that obsess over it. But it's definitely a top 5 job. You can make the argument it's number 1, but no, I think it's got to be Alabama right now. Their recruiting is so national, and it's all built around Saban. I'm not sure if that job is consistently number 1 forever if it's not Nick Saban pulling the trigger. Now, it'll still be top 5, still be top 3, somewhere in that range, because we know that fan base and that school is obsessed with football, and they will do absolutely whatever it takes to be successful at football. And therefore, I think given their consistency, given their championships that they've actually won, given their number one recruiting classes pretty much every single year, they've got to be at the mountaintop. They're the premier program. They are the premier program, and no, they don't have the recruiting base that the state of Texas has or the state of Georgia has, but they have absolutely no problem going into the state of Texas or the state of Georgia
or their own state,
picking off the number 1 players or number 2 players in the state. So I think given recent history, one school might have more money or one school might have a better state, but the total package, I think, Alabama is the top job in college football.
Nobody hangs up the phone on them.
Here's a funny part of this article. If Nick Saban wants to add 5 analysts whose only job is to dissect every time an opposing coach has punted in the last 20 years, He's not going to have to fight anyone to get those jobs created. From Owen in Franklin County, Virginia.
He'll hire a former NFL head coach to do that. Bill O'Brien will be doing that.
Yeah.
You know?
Florida, Alabama, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, and he mentioned Virginia Tech because of Frank Beamer's legacy. From 276, Alabama, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, and LSU. OU, by the way, was 8 on this list. From the 972, Alabama, Southern Cal, Texas, Ohio State, and Michigan. That's from the 972.
Well, let's talk about the team that was mentioned that's not one of the typical 4. Like, I think Georgia's is obviously very much built around recruiting and where they are. LSU's must be as well because the money factor isn't there. Like, I mean, their football program can get money and whatnot, but it's not exactly the job you hear about when you're like, that's where you go and strike it rich, you know, and that's where, like, that's like the kingdom come job, like you would say with an Alabama or as has been said about Texas in the past. You know, I'd put like the Texas, the Florida, and the USC jobs kind of all together and maybe like tier B, tier 1B with Alabama the number 1. And you could probably throw a few more schools into that mix as well. But LSU, I guess, is I don't know what the article said on them, but obviously the recruiting is good in the state of Louisiana, and there's a huge passion, of course.
The biggest difference I think LSU has to deal with in a lot of states, and I'm not trying to compliment any state government because they all, probably run poorly. But Louisiana's state government is run very, very poorly. It is. Oh, yeah. I mean, financially, it's always been a problem. Historically, it's always run very poorly. So, if Nick Saban wanted something that they were going to have to ask the state for some money for, the state of Alabama, as bad as it is in other areas, would probably have no problem pushing it through. The state of Louisiana, part of the reason that they kind of started clamping down on Les Miles before this scandal stuff even happened was like, well, we can't build this, we can't do this because the state's bankrupt. And we need to figure out how to finagle out of that.
All right. You can sit there and say all of these teams we've mentioned, and we're getting ready to read a lot of your list as well. Your calls at 254-339-1122 were loaded up. Alabama is the all-time greatest. I mean, Oklahoma's in that conversation. Notre Dame is in that conversation. So is Texas, or so is, who am I forgetting?
I don't think Texas is in that conversation, actually.
Well, all-time. I'm talking about forever, but all of them have
they're
had
in that conversation. Honestly.
All of them have had their downtimes, and Texas has now been through one for about a decade. Oklahoma had the 90s, Alabama on and off. But one thing about LSU, and I didn't think about this, they've had 3 national titles, or how many they've had in the last 20 years. 3 different coaches have won the national title: Saban, Miles, and Orgeron. So there's something rich there, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
And they got the talent in the South. Louisiana, bang for your buck per capita, incredibly loaded with amazing football talent. And they also can go west to Houston or go east anywhere in the South and go not that far even from Florida if you think about it.
Oh no, I mean they can go where they want. Like that's the thing is that all the jobs you mentioned, and Texas maybe less so than most of them because they spent so long not doing it, but they can go, Ohio State, USC, where they can fly into wherever, Pig's Knuckle, Missouri, and say, hey, would you like to come to Alabama or our school? And they say, yeah, I would like to do that. There's not every school can do that,
No, I mean, there's the logos. There's logo schools, and LSU, Texas, Oklahoma, they're all logo schools. But, yeah, what I'm saying about, UT, for example, and I'd say probably LSU more recently would have a much better argument. But just all time, I think there's a very clear group of 20 or so blue bloods. Mm-hmm. And you can have that group. And then I think there's a top group of the all-time greatest programs in college football. And I think that's 4 or 5 schools. And I wouldn't put Texas in that. I'd have obviously Alabama, obviously Notre Dame. I think Oklahoma, obviously. I think Ohio State's got to be considered for that. And then
there's and Notre Dame and Texas and others are kind of, they're in and out, right?
Yeah.
Because of. Here's from Scotty B., Alabama, Southern Cal, Ohio State, Penn State, and Texas from 318.
I was surprised when I see Southern Cal in the top 5.
Yeah, and they're 6. They're right there at 6. And, of course, that one right now is number 1 because they're open. LSU, Alabama, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Georgia from the 318, from the 540. Let's see here. Top 5 jobs. Florida, you already mentioned Virginia Tech. From the 310, Bama spends more on sports than research.
Yeah.
It's good to be higher budget priority than the entire faculty with a smiley face. And Diane, I agree with Craig. UT is not a top job. No matter how much money, you're destined to fail to meet the expectations.
Well, I didn't say that. I didn't say they're not a top job. I'm saying
they're top 5.
Okay. I'm not even saying that.
No, yeah, that's right. UT is not a top job is what Diane is saying.
Okay, I'm not saying they're not a top job, and I'm not saying they're not a top 5 job. I'm saying they're not a top top tier one all-time greatest football program. They might be two, but they're not one. They are not in the same class overall, in my opinion, as Alabama and Oklahoma and maybe 2 or 3 other schools, because I'm going off of Heisman championships, longevity, all of that type of stuff. Not money. I'm not going off of money. And if you go money, then they're number one.
Yeah. Here's another thing is that there's some of them kind of fading it out. UT back in the 2000s would have been a part of that conversation. And one of the problems is sometimes they still think they are, and they feel as if that's what it should be like because of how much they do commit to it, but they've fallen short for about a decade since the 2009 season. They've really had one chance to win a conference title, and that was against Oklahoma in the year they lost 4 games. Doesn't mean they haven't been a part of some nice wins. They played Baylor in 13 at Old Floyd Casey Stadium in a brutally cold day. Baylor hammered them. That was for a Big 12 championship, believe it or not, before it was in the gap of when they did not play games. Paul, let's light up the line.
All right, let's get the shot clock up, Jack, because we've got 5 callers on the line.
254-339-1122.
All right, let's go to Ben in Oregon. You're on the Bet US caller line. Thanks for your call, Ben. Nope. Ben did not make it. Okay, hold on. All right,
Ben, come on. You're going to call in. Be patient with us. Okay, here we go.
All right, he's Ben from Bend. Okay. Oscar in Grand Prairie, you're on the Bet US caller line.
Hey, it's actually Colin. You guys give me a shout out. Yes, I'm actually in Florida. I just have a Texas phone.
Okay.
It's okay.
But yeah, I was just calling. So you guys were talking about the USC job. I think right now it's just a matter of what coaches are out there that make teams better. So there are good logos and team names, but there's only a handful of coaches that make those teams what they are. Just like you said earlier, Saban makes Alabama go. There's only a few coaches that could elevate those teams to that level. So I don't know what coach could make USC back to that level, but I don't think there are enough coaches to make those top tier teams that great again.
Yeah, okay.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think, like, if you're wringing your hands, because I was thinking about, Smokey and I have constant talks about our favorite schools, and I think you have to have realization that there are only a certain number of coaches who can do what Saban and Dabo
or
and
when Urban was in college.
Meyer, what Bobby Bowden did, what Tom Osborne did, what Steve Spurrier did, what Dennis Erickson and what all the coaches at Miami were doing. There's only a certain number of coaches who can, and they don't necessarily all work at the same time. So they and some of them now and it's even harder because there might be some coaches who could, but since the NFL is now dipping into college more, that's a coach that could win consistently national titles that's getting NFL money and an NFL
what's amazing,
job now.
though? You had Oklahoma, you had Miami, you had Florida State, you had Nebraska, you had Southern Cal, you had Alabama during a stretch where all of them were. They were almost all. Bowden, Osborne, the Miami run, there was it at times, but now coaches don't stay at places very long. The Frank Beamer's one of the latest. Stoops was there a pretty long time. If you think about it, he's now gone. There aren't many Lavelle Edwards at Brigham Young and even coaches that have been around 15 or 20 years at the same place.
Well, and then for the have-nots or the tier, C's or whatever that aren't the premier like top 5 to 10, and then that second level that are like all-time great programs. Well, if you're Mississippi State, you're building up your football program, you're doing really well, you feel like you're onto something. What happens? Here comes Florida, and they take your head coach. You know what I mean? You could go to basketball. Texas Tech's building up. Great program. Play for a national title. Don't get it. What happens? Texas comes in and takes their coach, and you can go example. That doesn't help matters either. And that's typically why those top teams are always the top teams, and there's not really any new blue bloods. I mean, maybe you could start putting Oregon in that as like one of the newer ones. Although I don't know if you quite want to go all that way, like in terms of the full definition, championships-wise, they're not there yet. But it's very difficult to break into that club for a reason because they get the best coaches. And like Art Briles was at Baylor. What happened towards the end before the scandal hit? Texas was trying to hire him as their head coach, you know? It's like we just played each other. You're trying to hire our head coach, dude? What the hell? So, yeah, that comes into play as well.
All right, 254-339-1122. Shot clock is ready.
All right, 2 calls break and then 3 calls after that. Ben in Oregon called back. All right, Ben, what you got?
Hey, yeah, sorry about that. Can't wait to play you guys in 2027 and 2028 non-conference.
Yeah, be cool.
Absolutely. It would be great. I hope it gets to that point.
I hope so, because it looks like there's some changes already have maybe been made on the schedule. But, yeah, top destinations, you're the caller hit. And I was going to say, I think Oregon's up and coming. I think it is. It'll be a championship level that will take them over the top.
Well, and
agreed.
And for your sake as a fan, Ben, and thanks for your call, I hope so, because Oregon's done everything but that.
Yeah.
They've built their national brand. Everybody's familiar with them. They know they have a billion different uniforms. Phil Knight has done everything he can for that, except had they beaten Ohio State that night in Dallas, if Ezekiel Elliott wasn't a person in the world that existed, maybe, just maybe, they would have taken that next step already.
Well, I definitely think they would have taken a step to be able to have that to claim. Marcus Mariota had a fantastic year, the Heisman year and all that. But, yeah, they get that opportunity. They was that the original playoff?
The first one,
the original playoff, and then just came up short in the title game. But no, Oregon's definitely it'd be interesting to kind of pool, and maybe that's something we throw out there at some point is who is not quite a blue blood in that group of 20 or so schools, if it's even that, but is maybe one of those programs that's starting to knock on the door a little bit. Georgia's been bandied about whether they're blue blood, but they also don't have quite the recent national championships and things like that either. It's
last time they won a national championship, the other big thing that happened that year was I was born.
Yeah, exactly. So they're kind of, I guess you'd put that tier 1B as well, and Oregon is there. But Oregon's much newer, to the whole thing, and I definitely think they're one of the leaders of the pack of the new school. And I'd be curious if there were other examples that I'm just not thinking of.
You mean right below,
breaking into the party? They haven't been a member of the party, but they're knocking on the door, and they might get let in, and they might have got let in if they won a national title.
There's a history of teams doing that. Florida State had to break it down.
Exactly,
Miami, about the same time, had to break down the barriers, and there are others where a lot of times the Alabamas, the Ohio States, the Oklahomas. And I want to bring Michigan. That's one of those teams that's faded out, like Nebraska or Tennessee or maybe Texas. There's going to be teams that arrive. And can you have sustaining power? Clemson. Hey, let's not forget them. When they had Danny Ford, they won it an 80, I think it was, 80 or 81. They had to arrive. They weren't a part. They have some history. Don't get me wrong. They've got great history and Hall of Fame coach before Dabo Swinney, before Danny Ford. But Clemson had to kind of do that. All right, back to the calls.
All right, David, and we'll take a break. David in New York City, you're on the Bet US caller line. Thanks for your call.
Yeah, this is David from Notre Dame. Congratulations, guys, on the expansion. I think the 12 teams you got are excellent. You're going to have a lot of success. I'm calling quickly about the divisions, the divisional structure in the Big 12. So let me just quickly get this off. I think you want Iowa State in the Eastern Division because you want the trifecta of Iowa State, Cincinnati, and West Virginia. You want those three schools competing and sort of invading Big Ten territory. So just like you got the Cy-Hawk game with Iowa and Iowa State, you got Cincinnati invading Iowa or invading Ohio with Ohio State recruiting, and then West Virginia's right there too. So I think you want those three schools in the East invading Big Ten territory. Then you got UCF in the East. And then with respect to the West, very quickly, you got BYU, of course. I think you want to, couple that with Oklahoma City and the Kansas schools, keeping them together. And then you got two Texas schools for each of the East and the West. And how you divide those up is a little bit more dicey. But I think what would make sense is having Baylor's a little bit closer to Houston. So that's a nice little rivalry you'd pick up there with Baylor and Houston every year. And then Texas Tech is obviously a little bit closer to Utah in the West. And they always call Fort Worth the gateway to the West. So TCU would be in the West too. What do you guys think about that? Thanks.
Thanks for the call. We appreciate it. We got to go to a break because we have a guest coming up. But you guys respond to him, and then we have to break to get on track.
I don't hate it. I like the idea.
Here's from JP goes, don't split up the Texas schools. Don't split them up. So if you do divisions, don't split up the Texas schools. That doesn't mean you can't because they didn't do that when the Big 12 was formed. They split up Big 8 schools, but they surely didn't split up the Texas schools.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have divisions. We know that. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think your idea is worthwhile and is worth exploring, but somebody immediately says, no, you got to keep the Texas schools together. So I guess it's in the eye of the beholder. Like, to me, honestly, I'm cool with pretty much whatever. I'm just happy that there's a conference, quite frankly. So where they end up division-wise is not like it's got to be like this for me. But I am open to hearing any and every idea on what they might be able to do. And so definitely appreciate your call, man, and appreciate that idea. And I can also appreciate someone who says, like, hey, no, the Texas schools have to stay together. But no, I think the idea makes sense.
Here are the coaches who are active in college football that have won a national title. It's a very small list.
Of course.
Ed Orgeron, Nick Saban, like 15 of them, Dabo, Kirby Smart,
not as a head coach.
Lane Kiffin, not as a head coach. Mac Brown, he does have the 1-5. Is that it? Jimbo Fisher, of course, yes. I don't know what this is from Ellie Le Spa. I don't know why you would forget about Jimbo Fisher.
Maybe an oversight.
The assistants don't count.
No, the assistants. So if you think about Ed Orgeron, Nick Saban, Dabo Sweeney, Mac Brown, Jimbo Fisher, and maybe there's one we're just forgetting. I don't know who that might be. When we come back, more from you, more of your calls. Let's light it up. And then eventually, John Wilner covers the Pac-12. His thoughts about many things college football. Sick 'em. 365 Radio. Don Shumador and Coffee Beans on their